born in South Chicago, 92nd, the southwest corner of 92nd and Houston Avenue. At that time, my father had a saloon there, and we lived upstairs. It was a two-story frame building with the saloon downstairs. The saloon was what they were called then, they're taverns today, and our family lived upstairs. At that time, the general furniture store was directly across the street on Houston and 92nd Street, and the drugstore kitty corner from us was later Zobel and Langdon's. I don't recall who was in there at the time I was there, but Zobel and Langdon is probably one of the oldest ones that goes back into that time. And there were dentist offices upstairs from Zobel's. Anderson and Drew, which was the leading clothing store in South Chicago at that time, men's clothing store, was directly beside my father's saloon on Commercial Avenue. That would be west of the saloon. The corners, let's see, across the street, Union Bank. The Union Bank was at 92nd and Baltimore Avenue in those days. And later became the Steel City Bank, which is now at 92nd and Houston Avenue. C.R. Caves was one of the big stores, was on 92nd Street, just off of Houston Avenue, the other side of General Furniture, exactly. Bender's was another big store. Bender's was on the corner of 92nd and Commercial. The the northwest corner of 92nd and Commercial, where the Commercial Theater was later built. It was torn down for the Commercial Theater. Boyer's Drugstore was across the street from that. And there was another drugstore for a while where the South Chicago Bank is today. The South Chicago Bank originally was next to Anderson and Drew's. Later, you had the Bowen Theater. And next to the Bowen Theater was Walter Tredup's. Well, Walter Tredup eventually went out of business, and the theater went out, and the South Chicago Bank went in at that area, and I went to work there at $9 a week as an office boy. And at that time, I worked for 3.5 years for the South Chicago Bank, and Warren Smith was the president of the bank. He lived on South Shore Drive, a wonderful man. Him and his wife often came in and talked to all the employees, etc. And his son-in-law, Guy Nelson, became the next president, and Guy married Warren Smith's daughter. So he was the president, and at that time I stayed there 3 years, and I was a commercial receiver teller, a payer teller, and also did the books on occasion for $17 a week. So when I told them I was going to leave, they said, Guy Nelson said, I'll give you 20, Augie, if you'll stay. Well, I had been offered a job at the Wisconsin Steel Company as a weigher for the new number 2 Bloomin' Mill. And I went out at the Bloomin' Mill and went to work there for $32.50 a week. It was $1 million in those days.
When was that? What year was that? Do you remember, Augie, that approximately?
Yes, it was about it was in the 20s.
Okay.
No, it was before the 20s. It was in about 18, or no, it couldn't be 18, 19, 20, about 20.
So the mill from
1920 or 21.
That mill, at least the blooming mill, was brand new then at that time.
Yes, brand new mill. And I stayed there because I got on the basketball team and the baseball team, and I stayed there for a couple of years. And in those years, you could buy stock in the mill. They take it out of your pay. And of course I had that done, and they paid us in cash. Up until one day, we had a big robbery. They used to pay you in the basement. As you come down 106th Street there, right down in the basement where the gate is there, was the paymaster. And they paid in cash. They gave it to you in an envelope. And this big holdup this day, they decided maybe they better pay in checks. So after that, it was always checks. But that was the time that they changed from cash to checks. Leaving there, I went to California for 7 months. Got a job, incidentally, in a bank while I was there. And the way I got my job in those days, unless you were a son, a favorite son of the area, you couldn't get a job. Impossible. But I played basketball, and they wanted a basketball player, and I got in, and we won a championship that year too. Back in that was about 22. Let's see. I stayed there 7 months, and I left, and that was one of the reasons why they never wanted people from outside, because they came in there and they stayed for a while and then they blew. I got a terrific recommendation from the fellow before I left to give me a written letter, which I still carry, and came back to Chicago and went to work at the Hyde Park Kenwood Bank, which later went down with during the Depression. That was about 29. Then I got a job at the World's Fair, and the fair was in 33. And immediately after the fair, I went to work for the Daily Calumet. I worked for the Calumet for about 25 years. Some of that tops over into this next job that I get. But I used to work. When I got with the Sanitary District. I used to work part-time with the Daily Calumet because I knew all the policemen and everything, and I was able to get that news in, and I brought the news to them.
What kind of work did you do at the World's Fair, Augie?
The World's Fair was cashier. And I had innumerable jobs. They put you on buses, and they gave you the various shows that they had and so forth and so on. And one of the shows was the young girl. What's her name? Not Gladys Young, but Loretta Young. Loretta Young, the movie star. Loretta and I were very, very, very good friends while I was down there. Very nice woman, very, very nice woman. And she had a little deal there, and I worked that for a while. And I went to work for the Daily Calumet. And of course, that's where most people know me from, the Daily Calumet. And I was sports editor there and everything else. I had practically every job. Acted as the editor many times because
was Frida working for it when you were there?
Frida was working there too at the time. Frida was there, and most of the girls that were there outside of Frida are dead. They're gone, but the two of them that I remember that were working there at the time that I was there was Jen Verdoliak, sister to Eddie, and Marie Ladkar, who was, let's see, she married a fellow by the name of Eddie Maris, who is dead, and she's a widow, and she lives across the street from the Sacred Heart Church, and she's still down in that area. Let's see, well, when John Henneberger became committeeman of the 10th Ward, he then became they're calling them commissioners now. They were trustees at the time at the Sanitary District. And he asked me to come down down there and do some publicity work for the sanitary because I had this job with the Calumet. So I left the Calumet and went down there and stayed down there for 22 years. And during that time, I served 2 terms in the House of Representatives as a Republican state representative. I had been a Democrat previously to that, but of course when I got with Henneberger, who was the Republican committeeman, I naturally transferred over to Republican side. I was down there for two terms, and then that was during the time that I was at the sanitary district. And only one person that I know of, and that's me. All the fellows that were working down there, 90% of them were working for the city, state, or county. In addition to that, such as I was, with the sanitary district was a separate outfit that you worked for. I did not get paid the days that I went to the state representative, down the state representative. Every one of them others got paid. We never got paid down there.
So a lot of them were double dipping.
That was never recorded anyplace or never put in the papers or anything like that. But I never was paid. The records would show, so it doesn't make any difference. But that was one of the things that happened. I stayed with the sanitary for 22 years. Most of the time in the pollution area, we were checking pollution into streams and lakes, etc. Got all along the lake here. During my time, we changed all of that stuff that went into the lake from the sanitary district, or from the steel company, Illinois Steel Company. Also, some of the steel company stuff that went down the river, that went into the river, and some of that river went into the lake also. A partner and I were the first two that were called, and the name of the job was God, it was an awful name. I can't even think of it. That's a peculiar long name, and but it was checking industry to see that there was no pollution put into the waters, and no acids, etc., put into the sewers. So we finally, for a number of years, I did this, and you could never get into Chicago. Chicago, because of the political situation, would not let you in because they had been taking care of all these guys and putting all kinds of stuff into the sewers, and they're taking it out. Finally, we got into Chicago. And previous to that, I got a little ahead of myself. We got we were in all of Cook County. We went a little bit out of Cook County. We went into DuPage a little bit, but not very far. But most of it was Cook County. I was in a place just outside of Lyons, where Reynolds Metals is, McCook to be exact. And Reynolds Metals had one stream of acid that was running down into a creek. We went to him, we told him, I said, you could make some money on this. I said, sell that oil secondhand, and they recovered some way, and you'll be paid for it. He says, I know so and so, and I said, you can know the Lord now. I said, it's no good. You must make these changes. What they had to do was put in basins that would take this acid, and you would put enough water in it so that it became neutral. Then they could release it. In the oil situation, they had to cut the oil out altogether, find a way to save that oil again. The guy told me when I went back there 6 months later, and he says, what the hell? He says, I'm making money on my oil. I said, well, here you were throwing it all away, and you're causing all this problem, and you didn't want to do it, and it's all done. This is what happened in most places that we went to. And all of this stuff in every industry, little industry, big industry, or anything that had anything going into creeks or the wrong stuff into the sewer, from the McCook, what's the other sideline where you cook up their lake, McCook Lake line back. We made every industry in that. And we would check them thoroughly, and eventually, if there was anything wrong, they had to change it and put in. And all of that industry now has all been changed, and most of your industry on the lakes have been changed. But sadly enough, Indiana has not cooperated at all. Indiana is very bad. As a matter of fact, Inland Steel Company has made a whole new mill by what they have thrown into the water and stolen that land. They've made a second mill in there since that time. And the acids that they put in, I sometimes wonder how our water is drinkable because of the rotten condition that it is today. This is now, today yet. They're still putting in all this acid and stuff into the lake, and not a thing is being done to them. So the government, the United States government, has to get after them and get after Indiana. Indiana, you're reading about now, about the Hammond outfit that's having all this trouble going into the little Calumet. Well, they've been running in there for years. And not only they, but the Gary steel mills were running with oil coming down. And we went to the steel mills, and the steel mills cut it down a little. We also went into Indiana on one other occasion. There was a creek over near Wicker Park. A creek runs through there, was loaded with oil. I went out there one day and I went up to the fellow and I said, Monon Roundhouse is what it was, the Monon Railroad Roundhouse. I said to the fellow, I said, do you know what you're throwing in there every day? And I said, what's coming down into Chicago? I said, we have no control over you. You can do whatever you want. But I said, I come here to ask you whether you can't do something about it. He says, I never knew it. I said, come with me. Come on down. We're going to show you something. So I took him down, showed him what was coming out of there and going into this creek. And he said, geez, I never knew that was happening. And the guy meant it. The way he talked, he meant it. And he did. He went back. They never had any more oil coming out of that thing anymore. But once in a great while in some of these places, they have something breaks, you know. And
sure,
they can't,
have an accident.
They can't, this is something you can't do. Then something happens. But that's a rarity that isn't too often. It happened at U.S. Steel a couple of times, and we had some terrific oil spills into the river, not into the lake, into the river. And for a while, the river was pretty bad, but they stopped it off and stuff. That was it. You said earlier here, I heard you say something about why you think, what you think stands out in your mind in South Chicago. Well, of course, I was the sports editor of the Daily Calumet. I want to say that in Southeast Chicago, we had more athletes than at any other place in the world. There were Major League Baseball players, there were Major League Football players, conference players, there were innumerable college high school players that went in. A lot of them would have been college high school players that played, never went to school in those days, didn't go to school. You had jockeys, you had two jockeys. You had Sporonsky, who was from South Chicago originally, and the Martin brothers lived on 91st Street between Exchange and us and Commercial at one time. And well-known old-time athletes, or jockeys. You had every branch of the athletics that one could talk about. You can say that somewhere in South Chicago, they were represented. I wish that my mind was good enough to give you the names of all of these people.
When you first
I can't think of all of them, huh?
When you first talked about going to work for the company because you were a basketball player and you played baseball as well, I was thinking about Ed Cusick. Ed Cusick, he's the vice president of the Historical Society. He used to be he worked for some steel company, and he was one of their.
I remember Ed well. Yeah, but I don't remember playing against Ed. I played in the Knights of Columbus League for years. We played one year in the quarterfinals of at the stadium, and that was right after the stadium was made. It was down there, and some 18,000 people down there when we played down there that time. I played also with the semi-pro team several games that we traveled around the Greyhound bus line. We traveled around Ohio, the Great Lakes states, and baseball. I played with Santa Maria, who was in those days we had well, Gob Buckeye pitched against us when we played for the championship, and we knocked them off years ago. And the semi-pro teams, the old semi-pro teams, often played, every so often would play major league teams and knock them off. They were that much better. But for some reason, some of those players never got onto the major leagues.
Yeah, Ed was talking about the quality of ball player that used to be in the semi-pro team.
Baseball players particularly, were far greater than the major leagues ever were, some of them. But we had a lot of them who were in the major leagues. This is one of the things that South Chicago can be proud of, is saying that they were the greatest sports community in the world, is what I think they are. The greatest sports community in the world.
I got to ask you this. It didn't occur to me to ask Ed, but when I was living on the west side, an old man, older than I was by far, he was retired at that point, taught me how to play baseball. And I saw a medal that he had won in 1918. He was semi-pro. He was a pitcher. And at age 63, that man could do things with a ball that I didn't believe he could do with a baseball.
Well, you had one that just
died. And I was wondering if you ever played against him. His name was Jim Ferrin, F-E-R-R-I-N. Does the name ring a bell enough?
F-A-R?
F-E-R-R-I-N. Jim Ferrin.
Ferrin, no, that name sounds...
He was somewhere in Illinois. I'm not sure where in Illinois he was at that time, but he was... I
don't think I ever played against him. The name sounds
fantastic pitcher. You know,
and then Farrell, the basketball coach that just died, I played against him in the KC League on many occasions, and they had quite a write-up on him in the papers here this last week. Let's see. Well, we had any other questions on athletics particularly, or anything else? I don't care what it is. If there's something I can answer, I'll answer.
If we were to go through and film buildings and sites in South Chicago now, what would be some of the important buildings that have survived that we ought to get on film?
Well, the first one that comes to my mind is Gobletz, because Gobletz was, I think, is the only building standing that's about the same as it was. It was Lederer's store. And one of the interesting things about Gobletz coming into South Chicago was that they're going to steal all our business and so forth. And Gobletz, thank God, they're down on their knees thanking the God that they're there today, because they're the ones that's bringing the people in bringing them in the clinic. That same condition would have happened. South Chicago wanted to, the Jewel wanted to move into Commercial Avenue from about the Gady Candy all the way down to Houston, all the way down to 94th, and take all of Houston in the back for parking. Everybody was ready to sell, but the Greek that owns the store on 91st Street, the old A&P, I forget the name of the store. It's a chain store.
Certified store?
Certified. And he fought it, and because he wouldn't sell a couple of lots that he had over on Houston Avenue, Jewel never came in there. This is after Jewel is built in there. This only within the last 5 years, wasn't it? I think it was the last 5 years, yeah. So it's a shame, because it would have beautified that whole block there, and eventually, if they ever get going, the Washington Hotel gets straightened out. They'll have South Chicago look like a real place, but they're playing around with that thing so long, I don't know what's going to happen there.
A lot of history. You mentioned Tony Zale. As one of the sports figures from here. Yeah, Tony Zale, the boxer. They're mentioning that Tony Zale was one of the sports figures out of the area too, right?
Tony was from Gary, originally from Gary. Yeah, but Tony was here, and Tony worked the parks for a while, and that's how Tony got around here most of the time. And he was in here and showed taught boxing to some of your boxers that are out in Winter. Yeah, you had when you go back to boxers. We had one of the places that we're talking about, places standing out. It's not here anymore, but it was the Calumet Theater. I think the Calumet Theater is a part of South Chicago's history. And in the Calumet Theater was owned by the Connors, not O'Connor, Connors brothers, And Mr. and Mrs. Connors originally, and then the brothers took over after. They also were the people who you got your Tribune from. What did they call them? Like Bill, what's his name was here, that had all the newspapers. The distributor. And the Calumet Theater had some of the greatest acts and plays that we've ever had in South Chicago.
It was live. It wasn't just. You're not talking just movies then, but live.
No, this is play. This is live stuff. Live stuff. But after they died down, they made a gym out of the upstairs, which was used by many of our fighters. Some of the fighters of the day were Jack O'Keefe, who was one of the real good light heavyweights. Cozy Dolan, who was I think Cozy was a 135 pounder. I don't know what they call him now. And then we had everybody knows Henry Leonard, who was also a very good player. And incidentally, Henry Leonard's stationery had him as the uncrowned featherweight champion of the world. And the reason for that is that the Frenchman who was the champion would refuse to fight Henry because he was a southpaw. They were afraid of southpaws in those days. If you were a left-hand boxer, they didn't want to box you. And so that was why he used that particular thing. See, we had Cozy Dolan, but you got Gene Spencer, who was still living, was a pretty good boxer, started at the YMCA, had one of the, he and Emil Baksic. Emil Baksic was a welterweight. And Emil was a terrific boxer, but he let himself get too heavy for his height. And so he fought Tony Canzonero. No, he played Tony. No, Tony was lighter. He fought the champion. I can't remember the name of the champion at that time, but the champion beat the heck out of him because he was too heavy. He let himself get too heavy, and he didn't have the ability to go about like it. But he was a terrific. He had the best amateur standing of anybody in Southeast Chicago. He won over 300 fights without a loss.
There was a wrestler, I think from Hegwish, that was at our
Anianovich?
No, I don't think so. I heard his first name was like Tiger or Killer or something.
Oh, no. He was that was it was during my time, but I was a young guy. God, what's his name? I can't think of his name right now. He lived in Hegwish, and he was a champion. And what happened to him was he married a girl who was the editor of a certain section of the Herald American, the Sunday Herald American. She took him for everything that he had, practically. And, God, I can't think of that. I'll be thinking of it. He was probably one of the greatest fighters we ever had in Southeast Chicago. There's no question. But really, he was in. He came in, and he came in when I was a young guy. And there's an older man than me. He can remember that name.
No, you're an older man.
Wait a minute. What's the name of the guy that was the fighter from Hegwish, the real good band?
Battling Nelson?
Battling Nelson. That's who you mean, isn't it? Yeah.
No, I know a little bit about Battling Nelson, but this was a wrestler who was at our 86 installation dinner, a big guy. And I thought his name was something like Tiger or Killer, a nickname.
Oh, wait a minute. Now you're talking about Tiger.
Wrestling?
Huh?
Yeah, wrestling. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a wrestler.
Yeah.
He became a movie star as well,
Yeah.
you know.
What was his
And
name?
is still living.
Who's
Yeah.
that?
Tiger Marsh or something like that?
Tiger Marsh.
Yeah.
Tiger
Okay.
Marsh is he's got a Croatian name,
Yeah.
and he went to Sacred Heart School. He lived right here. Went to Sacred Heart School.
Well, he was at a meeting of this organization.
We had him at the meeting. We had him at the first
About 2
meeting that you
years
had.
ago.
I had him there.
Yeah.
Tiger's
That was right.
Tiger's ill right now. He's living in down in Daly's area there. What do they call it?
Bridgeport.
Yeah, he's right Bridgeport. He's right in Bridgeport. As a matter of fact, it's the street, the 35th that the police station is on. He's right down the block from the police station. He is very ill. I see a piece in Cup's column the other day that said that he was very sick. Yeah.
No, sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Is this Mr. Maloney that just came in? Was it?
Yeah,
Walter?
It's
Yeah.
Walter Maloney. Yeah, he's 3 years older than I am. And,
What are some, and when you were acting as editor on the Cal, and you did editing not just in sports, but also.
I know you did everything there. You didn't do sports. You
Are
did
there
everything.
any stories?
You wrote the desk. You wrote the news. Besides getting the sports out, I was getting all the police news. I was up at 5 o'clock every morning in those days. I went to the Grand Crossing station. Then from the Grand Crossing station to the battalion headquarters at 74th and Dobson to get all of the South Shore fires every morning. Then I'd shoot to the east side, get the east side station, go to the 93rd and Houston and South Chicago Avenue, and that's a headquarters also. So I got all the South Chicagans out there in the east side and got the fires out of there. Then I went from there to South Chicago and got the fires there. Then when we got through, when I first started, we used to make the court. Remember, we had a court in South Chicago. So as soon as I got through getting out all my stuff there, I rushed to the court and took the court cases and brought them back.
Are there any stories that really stand out in your mind from when you were working as editor? Any?
Well, as I was working as the reporter, etc. there, one time I scooped the city of Chicago on a case. Both I scooped for I used to cover the Sun-Times for local news. What I used to do is I used to keep my piece for the Daily Calumet, which I thought was the piece we should have, and I give them the others. See, so for about 2 weeks there were 2 kids that disappeared. Nobody knew where they went. They just disappeared in the cold. And the address was at 83rd and Manistee, or somewhere in there, about 83-something Manistee. So one day, we always had a police calls and fire department. I had a regular ticker put in there. We had a ticker put in for them. So we had the same thing as the fire department had. And we get a call over the thing, and this address comes in there. And I'm up on the we're up on the 3rd floor all the time that I worked there. You had to run down that 3rd floor, jump in the car, and off you were, see? Well, I down the floor, and I got this address, and over there, they found the 2 kids in a trunk. They were sitting in there and playing, and the thing came over, and they couldn't get it up. They smothered in the trunk. So I gave the Times the scoop on it, and I kept my stuff that I wanted. And one of the leading writers, and I can't think of his name either, for the Sun-Times at that time came out to cover that story. And I don't know if you've ever seen a movie when they all run for the telephone. They want to get the phone so they get it in. And I was lucky enough to get there, and I give the Sun-Times what I thought I want to give them. And this guy is standing next to me. I don't know him from Adam. See, and he says, "Who are you talking to?" I said, "Sun-Times." He says, "God damn it!" He says, "There's this way." He says, "I'm down here to take this story." He said, "I'm supposed to take this story." Well, I said, "They've already got the story." I said, "I give them the whole, I give them the works." So that I'll never forget that. But they had a streamer, top streamer on it, and I had all the information I wanted, so my information different than what they had, so I had, of course, we had the top streamer, and we had it for several days after, with stories in it. That's one of the outstanding things. The other things, I would have to go into fires, and elevator fires were the big things in those days.
Was there a big one on 36 over here along the river somewhere?
99th Street, yeah.
Well, there was one on 93rd.
99.
That was the last big one.
You had them all.
93rd Harbor Avenue.
I think the biggest one was before I got it.
Cargill, 122nd.
122nd, that was the biggest one.
That blew windows out as far as 79th Street.
Was it like a green elevator that explodes?
They
Explode, yeah, the dust,
Yeah.
yeah. And today, they've got that down pretty good. But there was one exploded not too long ago.
Well, that's why they keep
And,
changing them from
and
bin to bin.
I can't figure out how it did.
Silos,
Yeah.
just keep changing them too.
Because when you get into this dust stuff, they're washing it so close that you sometimes you wonder how anything could even happen.
No, I
They
remember
call
when
it spontaneous combustion.
yeah. The fourth floor of Brock's Candies went off like that. My aunt was a nurse there at the time. That was back in the 40s, I think, or the early 50s. And they blew the whole floor right off the building practically.
No,
That was just
we
from
had-
starch.
I must
Where was
say,
that?
Brock's Candies, Lake Street,
Oh.
on the west side of Chicago. Kilpatrick and Cicero was in that
I
area.
see, I'm not familiar.
you
And
had
those are excellent
a number of them while I was at the Daily Calumet. One of them was at 100th Street. All of them were in the area of 101st, 102nd, or 98th, and down in that way, and most of them on our side of the river. Your side of the river, the only one was that one there, 99th Street. Yeah, it was then at that time was known as the world's largest elevator. Since that time, Duluth has got a speed. They've got bigger ones up there.
As you can tell, well, we've been talking about South Chicago and its history, things that Augie remembered, things that, some of the things that were
He's
outstanding in
going
this
to give
one.
you a talking to in a little while. You can get in there and you get
Or jump
you
right
can
in.
tell him all
He's
about
4
the things.
years older than me.
You can tell him all the things that happened before I got around. See? Yeah.
He said you were 3 years older
But you
than
know,
you
he
said
was just
before.
speaking about those two kids smothered in the icebox or whatever it was.
Yeah,
No,
no,
today that wouldn't be nothing.
Huh?
Because they're throwing kids out of windows and they're jumping
Yeah, I know,
out and they're
I know,
falling
yeah,
out and
yeah,
they're burning up every day.
yeah.
Those days that was spectacular. The most spectacular news in South Chicago was when old man Newsbaum was murdered. He lived on Baltimore Avenue, Carpenter. Some guy was after his wife and he wanted to get him out of the way, so he
That
did
was
the house.
before, he told me my time at the Daily
No.
Calumet. That was before the Daily Calumet.
Do you remember that?
See, and yes.
Newspaper.
Yeah.
And
And you
they
could just
found his
about
body.
remember it because your father was working up there and he told you about it, see?
My
So I
father-
got it.
My father worked at the Daily Calumet all his life.
father
The
was
only
up at
job
the
he ever
Calumet,
had.
yeah.
He started when he was 14.
Yeah.
They're not kidding when they say that paper's been around for a while, haven't
Yeah.
Oh, yes. We celebrated, for the Daily Calumet, we celebrated 125 years, I think. But before they went to 100 years, I know.
I had
100 years,
copies
I know,
of-
but,
I had the special editions of the paper when they had these variants.
Yeah. They had a lot of special editions during that time, and whenever they had one of these big things.
I think around 1940 they put out that commemorative
Yeah.
edition that
What
was in
time
book
have you
form.
got?
I've got 10:52. How are you doing for time?
All right, I'm
I'm
going to
not
go in a
doing so
couple of
good
minutes.
either. I didn't even want to come on account of this weather. But
Isn't it awful? I'm glad you both were able to
Yeah.
make it. I felt guilty when I realized how bad
Are
the
you
weather.
Mr. Murphy?
Yeah, right.
Oh, I'm very glad to meet you.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
God for
Well, you've seen him at the meetings,
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
one, yeah.
But I'm ready to jump in and cooperate any way I can.
Where's our other third man?
Alex?
Alex said
Alex.
he couldn't get here before 11.
Yes,
Since,
the two.
since that time, I now call myself a senior citizens activist, because I belong to about 9 outfits, and I got a,
That raises a question. One of
Yeah.
the things that the audience, I'm sure, would be interested in is what kinds of things are the communities doing for senior citizens or involving senior citizens in? What kinds of activities are there today?
Oh, God, there's all kinds of
There's all kinds of
I don't know
meetings.
what goes on in Francis D. Sales, but all these clubs go on trips. They're always going
Yeah,
on
they're going on
shows
trips
and
and things
entertainments
like
or
that.
amusements. There must be 6 or 7 of these clubs in the area, you know.
Now, the other thing is that what I do is when we find out that there's some laws about to be passed in Congress, whether they be there or in the state, within the state, we get to the senior citizens and ask them to write to their state representative and to the governor, if necessary, asking that these particular things pass.
Now, you
And
say,
this has helped a lot.
you said we, Augie. Is that you as a member of a particular group?
Members of the various groups. I happen to belong. I happen to be a president of Russell Square Park. I'm now. That's why I got to get back there because there's speakers coming in, and I want to meet him when he gets in there. Also, I'm active in the 4th District Advisory Council, seniors.
That's what
That's the police district.
That's what you're just talking about.
I'm
Fourth
very,
police district, right?
I'm very active in the state's attorney Daley's advisory council, and I belong to the Speaker of the House's advisory council also, which is a smaller group, that isn't as big as, but Daley's group is the biggest of the county areas that there is. And I also belong to St. Mary Magdalene, St. Michael's, St. Francis de Sales, the East Side seniors.
Side Valleys.
And I make most of, I also make, where a lot of people are forgetting and don't go down because they think it's black. They have a southeast section of the city of Chicago, senior section, it's a place at 79th and Pergier. Beautiful, big building, red carpet, beautiful place. And it's a shame that a lot of people don't make use of it. The blacks do, because it's down in their neighborhood there. But I make every meeting the 3rd Friday of the month. Alex, when he can, goes. Alex usually goes because but his wife keeps him, his wife is very sick and he's home most of the time. 2 or 3 others from South Chicago go down there and that's all. There's no one else go down. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of good stuff comes in down there. They always have a speaker. They give you the latest stuff that's on in Congress and so forth, news that we should know about, and so forth, and you get what's going on. You bring it back to your groups. Yeah. No, I don't miss. I don't miss that. Very, very rare that I miss a meeting down there.
Sounds important.
Yeah.
Augie, we want to thank you for the time that you spent with us.
Well, I'm often running. If there's anything else that you wanted to ask me, I'll be glad to answer it. But that's got it. But he's got most of the answers, so he'll give you all.
To be honest.